warm welcome to discussion about sustainable construction of the future in the Nordic countries. The challenges in the construction industry are severe. We know buildings account about 40% of global CO2 emissions. Most of the negative climate impact comes from building materials, construction, and demolition. So how to change this is what we are going to talk about today. My name is Nina Ogod, and I come from a Nordic Council of Ministers and Nordic Council. I'm a head of communications, and I have pleasure to be stand-in moderator today. And this is a part of the Nordic dialogues that we are having around the Nordics. So we have been turned to from Bornholm, Folkemødet in Denmark, and we've been in Almedalen, and now we are here in Pori. And special thanks to our panelists arriving from different parts of the Nordics to Pori. And yes, these discussions are part of our contribution to our Nordic Vision 2030, our region to become the most sustainable and integrated region in the world by 2030. And we also celebrate 70 years of parliamentarian collaboration and 51 years of governmental collaboration. And today we are going to continue this great tradition of discussing and challenging and problem solving together. And now let me introduce the panelists. So we have Dorte Bubaesen, CEO from Form and Design Center Sweden. Welcome. And you are also actually our host today from the behalf of the SUSTAINORDIC project that we are shortly about to hear a little bit more. And then we have Maria Karjalainen, the chairwoman of Föreningen Nordens ungdomsförbund. And we have Tuuli Kaskinen, CEO for Climate Leadership Coalition, CLC.
Good morning.
And Matti Kuittinen, from the senior specialist from the Ministry of Environment, and several other roles that we will come into. So welcome. A small practical thing. That we have these cameras here, but this is only for internal documentation. So this is a truly live session, don't be afraid. And now you know our panelists, and then we also have people that are having the breakfast, and I hope that you will come with some questions and being actively interrupting also, because that's a possibility when we are not that many. So please do that. And then I think that we have to go to the, what are you working and what are your perspectives and how are the, who are your organizations, that everyone here gets to know a little bit more about that. And Dorte, maybe you start because you are actually the project owner here, so please.
Thank you, Nina. And my name is, as Nina mentioned, Dorte Bubaesen, and I'm actually the CEO of an old institution in Malmö called Form Design Center. And I have a long background as a designer, and I've been focusing on collaboration with the industry as well as the academy. Form Design Center I have been in charge of since almost 4 years. And it is an independent institution and the only venue in Sweden actually addressing architecture, design, and arts and craft. And I think we are the only one in the Nordic countries as well, addressing all three perspectives. And we became a project leader of this Nordic focus. And we did that in order to actually accelerate our sort of perspective of architecture and design, not only in the Nordic countries, but as well as also in Europe. And that is a new development and strategy for the institution. We are a national node for the Swedish policy called Gestaltet livsmiljö. Also translated into be designed a sustainable living environment. And we do that in a regional context, but we also execute on a national level. So we are a very sort of strange institution in a way, addressing these different aspects. We are also a partner of the European Bauhaus investment, where we are addressing the design as an important approach in the European Bauhaus keywords. It's addressing collaboration, innovation, inclusion, as well as aesthetics. And that is what we want to address also in this Nordic aspects. As a facilitator, the organization acts as a kind of a bridge builder in the cultural ecosystem. We collaborate with organization within the triple helix model, but we are also, of course, addressing the quarter helix as an approach. And in order to generate and communicate knowledge with our subjects through exhibitions and programs, we do that as well together with development projects, such as the project that we have with the Nordic regions under the cover of SUSTAINORDIC. So sustainability, collaboration, and a holistic approach is keywords in order to make 1 + 1 = 3. So that is my...
Thank you. And then Tuuli, I think you have a little bit different part. You come a little bit different part of the ecosystem. So maybe you tell a little bit about CLC.
Definitely great to be here, and good morning, everyone. Climate Leadership Coalition is a combination of 90 companies, cities, and universities. The core is that the companies are active dealing with climate change. They want the forerunners to be able to thrive and the environment for them to be positive. But also that, like, the whole question of climate crisis and how to solve them is on our agenda. We have members and we have roots in Finland, but nowadays also members from Sweden and Denmark. And yes, there are actually a couple of construction companies as well, as we are kind of multi-industrial. And for us, the fact that a built environment creates almost half of the global emissions kind of makes this field to be one of the important ones. So that's where I come from. Yeah. And actually I have only started in this organization in the beginning of April, and before that I was in Demos Helsinki think tank, where I have been collaborating, for example, with Matti on the different kind of built environment questions dealing with built environment.
And I know that you also have been working with companies like a little bit more traditional approach to the construction materials and so forth. So I think you have a good knowledge about the industrial side and those facts that also affecting.
Yeah, I'm board member in Fira, which is one of the kind of mid-size construction companies in Finland. Originally made great concrete park houses. That was where that company comes from, as quite many of the construction companies have the same kind of background. But of course, nowadays, many different kind of building projects.
Thank you. And then I actually go to Maria. And maybe you can tell a little bit about what is your background. And I know that you work in a very exciting building, and also from the Nordic perspectives.
Yeah. So good morning, everyone. So I'm Maria Karjalainen. I'm the chairperson for Föreningar Nordens Ungdomsbund, or the Youth League of the Norden Associations. And the Norden Associations are over 100 years old non-governmental organization that tries to give citizens possibility to learn about more Nordic cooperation and bringing up more also in society what are the Nordic possibilities in the citizen level. And of course, as a youth league, we have organization in every Nordic country, and we try to make possible to Nordic youth to meet and talk and share experiences, and also think how can we improve and make better future for ourselves here in the Nordic countries. And yeah, that's maybe the organizational background, I'm also the chairperson here in Finland for our national organization. And we also work, there is this political side, also more so social and cultural side in our work. And for me, maybe the cultural part is maybe the most interesting, since I'm working at the moment in a medieval castle at Häme Castle in Hämeenlinna. So I have some perspectives also about the cultural heritage and that kind of things.
Thank you. And then Matti, you have so many hats, so please start from somewhere.
Yes, well, I could start by saying good morning, everybody. And my main job is at the Ministry of the Environment, where, as you know, we are the boring bureaucrats who are trying to build a better world through regulation. So that's my bread and butter, so to say. But because one job isn't enough, as we all know, I'm a part-time professor at Aalto University. I'm studying, teaching and researching resource-efficient construction. And then I just started this super interesting project called the New European Bauhaus with the European Commission. We are having our own Nordic program on this. So there's a Nordic aspect to that, and I'm one of the two coordinators for this New European Bauhaus. And then as I'm an architect as my profession, I still practice that as a hobby, you know,
Hey.
some content to your life.
That sounds like you have experience and views to the topic. So I think that we start, because we actually are kind of trying to address architecture and design, and then the material side of that, but also a little bit about the politics, that everything is about rules and regulations and money, and that's also like the political side of the discussion. So I think that we start from the architecture and the kind of the aesthetics that Tore was mentioning. So we know about this heavy emissions throughout a life cycle of buildings, and it's a lot about thinking kind of the design processes and how to have the creative side of and the aesthetics combined, and then doing everything in very effective, functional way. So maybe Matti, what are your thoughts? Why are we not there yet? So why we are talking about this now when we already knew for decades ago that there is an issue? So from the architecture point of view.
Yes, it's true that we've known that the climate crisis for way too many decades, and we still have been very, very slow in our action, which is tragic. But it's just become apparent during the past decade or so that how important the construction sector is. And as new information emerges, and as new statistical information becomes available, it seems that we should take very swift action in the construction sector. And it takes time to turn a big ship, you know, because the construction sector, as you could describe it, is rather conservative, and maybe it hasn't been described as the most agile of the sectors. But it still has a very, very important position because of the high emissions associated, and also to the very, very severe biodiversity loss connections. We could go deeper into those now with some dramatic percentages, but maybe I will save them for later.
Okay, thank you. Daughter, what do you think about like this design, Nordic design DNA? Do we have something that we have, especially in the Nordics, that are related to architecture and aesthetics and planning the buildings?
I definitely we do have, but we also have a variation within the Nordic countries, and I think that is important to address. One issue is the ownership of the processes is very different. I think that for instance, in Denmark, I know that the architect and the designer owns the process actually from A to O, where in Sweden the architects are much more brought into the process as a consultant, and that makes it very, very different to have a total sort of grip on the process, and therefore it's often things are changed under the process in Sweden, for instance, where the builders, they would go home and say, okay, now we have this proposal, but we also have an Excel, and we go into the Excel and we look at the bottom line, and then we say, sorry, but we cut this and this and this. So I think what that sort of conflicts into the aspect of how do we talk aesthetics and who owns the aesthetic part. Because talking about aesthetics, I think we talk long-sighted development in a completely different way that we do if we only talk engineering. And in Sweden, at least, we see that we work very much in silos. And the aspect of the new policy of this gestaltet livsmiljø is actually to work much more on a cross-functional sector, both within the politics, both within organization, but also within architects and engineers and so forth. And I think that's a very, very important part. But there is a difference.
Yes. So there is kind of a Nordic way of thinking and the vision that what we would like to have on the architectural side, but then the systems are very different in the Nordic countries. And as you address the kind of the ownership, so who owns and who has the power to decide along the processes, that might be very, you can end up a different place where you started, if I understood correctly.
Yes, exactly.
Tuuli, how do you think from the industrial point of view? So what is what is your feeling at how the companies, construction companies or material producers, how they see this dilemma that Dorte is describing?
I think it's part of the quite big challenge the whole industry has, which is the fact that it's still a little bit, I use now word artisanal, but not in positive way. It can be also, and it should be very positive. But in construction, the fact is that there are these different plots, different kind of plans you make there, and in the end, the buildings end up looking quite same. If you take a look at the kind of 2 rooms and kitchen type of flats you can buy, you compare them, there is pretty much one type of new flat you can buy. And still the process is kind of hard to go through in a way that it's not very efficient. The users are not able to have their impact on the process. And for the company and for the society, it becomes quite expensive. And that's a challenge also from environmental point of view, because that means that there are so many challenges that this environmental question has been a little bit like behind the other ones. And my understanding at the moment is that all of this should be solved kind of at once, so that we have stronger consumer perspective and understanding of consumer needs, different kind of needs, because of course there are different kind of needs and different kind of ways we would like to live, for example, or we would like to do our shopping or whatever it is. But at the same time, there has to be this more industrial process in a way that we can take into account, and the companies can and have to take into account both material and energy questions, which are in core when we talk about climate change.
Yes, thank you. And now we're kind of addressing also the political side, that we need to have those laws and regulations maybe as a drivers for the businesses to change.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I'm a great fan of Michael Porter, whose key idea is that environmental legislation drives innovation, and that we have seen in fossil fuel industry, and that we will be seeing in other industries as well. So Matti is doing very important job in that way.
Yeah. And I think that's also part of the Nordic kind of heritage, that we have such a strong tradition for rules and legislations, and that is actually one of the competitive edges that we have as a region. But Maria, just wanted, you are kind of the future customer. You are going to buy houses and you are going to have demands that Tuuli was mentioning. So how do you see this? When you hear this, what are your feelings kind of as a customer or citizen?
Of course, I think that if we think about the users' point of view in these teams also, it is really important, of course, if we think of environmental aspect, to have long-lasting buildings, but also the using and needs inside the building also probably changes during different times. So it would be really important to have buildings that you can convert different rooms and change the functions that are in that buildings, for example. So that is probably one aspect that it's good to think when you think about architecture. And of course, we come to the materials also, that there are environmental materials and of course, and also one maybe aspect, here we probably talk more about the ecological and economical side of sustainability, but of course there is also the social and cultural side of the sustainability. Also, for example, in Finland, I don't know much about what is situation in other Nordic countries, but for example, there are a lot of schools that in those buildings air inside is really bad and you have to close down those schools. So it's also really important to make sure that people's well-being is also taken care of when we are building new buildings. So that there isn't going to be, for example, problems with health or things like that.
Thank you. And I think you're touching upon a very important point that Tuuli also mentioned, this, that kind of the holistic view and what is sustainability. Sustainability is, of course, three-dimensional. So we have the social aspect, we have the green, but also the competitiveness of the companies and our industries. But Matti, now when you heard this, so what are your kind of reflections as an architect?
Well, of course, we are making buildings for people. We are not making buildings because that they would be like very energy efficient or so that they would have a low carbon footprint or anything like that. The fundamental starting point of making buildings is so that we could have homes and schools and shopping malls. But then again, why? And I think that we seriously need to reposition architecture and our desire for more space and for more comfort, because there isn't just enough resources on this finite planet for all of this. And I'm not blaming anybody here, of course, now, because this might feel as if the finger of blame is starting to point someone. But this is actually a quite fundamental change of approach to all consumption. It's not just construction, but because half of annually consumed materials on the planet go into construction, therefore construction is the sector where we must start. And if we think about that, the global drivers for more like in the future, so there will be more people on the planet. We are going towards 11 billion. So we just have to do the next buildings with less resources. And normally that is like about consuming less energy, but now it's apparent that we must start consuming less materials. And one last point, that means that we should build less. So architecture shouldn't be about building new buildings, it should be about using those that we already have.
Tuuli, you had a comment on that, and then Todd.
Actually, Matti did it himself.
Okay.
But I have to refer 3 years back here in SuomiAreena, one of Matti's colleague from the university, Professor Seppo Junnila, said that actually if we want to solve climate crisis, we should not build anything new in upcoming 10 years. Because while we are building new buildings, it's always the emissions are so high. And now it's not about the lifetime emissions, but it's the question of how we solve climate crisis within 10 next years. Of course, the companies I represent are understanding this a little bit differently, are seeing it important to have this long-term perspective as well. But that's also true. Like from climate perspective, we should halve the emissions in this decade. So the fact is that everything new we build, it should be very much needed if we do that.
Thank you. And Dorda, you had also.
I just want to comment on that because I think transformation is extremely important here. And in a way, there's a lot that we can do with existing buildings, environments, in order to transform them into new way of using them.
Happily, modernization is also a good business.
It is, and I think that is. So we are talking about in Sweden and a little bit in Denmark as well. Is that should we build anymore? Because there's a lot to be transformed of the existing building sort of environments, and they also could add to the history of what we are brought up in. I think that's an important aspect.
And at the same time, I think within tens of kilometers from Pori even, there are buildings that no one is willing to have, which value, the usage value and other value is like zero. And that's also truth. So in that sense, it's not an easy question.
No, it is not. But I think that's where design and architecture come in order to see the possibilities of a transformation.
Exactly.
Yes. Thank you. And now I'm also looking people there. Anyone who wishes to comment or reflect questions about the architectural thinking and system change that I hear that we are approaching. Anyone? Yes.
So, my name is Lotta Aalto. I'm from EIT Raw Materials. And well, I don't have a question from my my profession, but as a kind of newly house owner, I bought a very nice newly built flat. And well, I was just in the mercy of the builder, so they just made as cheap as possible. And or as a kind of house owners, we had nothing to say of the windows that we want to have there, or any of the materials that we would use. So how to change this, how to change the power of the builders, and their kind of aim is only to make maximum profit.
Oh, this is a good question. I can see, Dorte, your eyes are like,
of course. That's addressing actually something that we, through this project, SUSTAINORDIC, want to address is the differences in the Nordic countries. And I know I'm Danish, but living in Sweden, and I know that the system is very, very different, where the builders have a very strong power in Sweden and work very much in silos, where, like in Denmark, the architect has a larger and own the process much longer. So where do we bring that into sort of a collaboration, and then also bringing the user into the discussion as well? Because I think we need to address different aspects here in order to think long term. And it's not only a matter of the Excel sheet and what is on the bottom line, but it's actually a matter of talking about quality from day one. Because also for you to stay longer where you want to live.
And I think also what Maria was mentioning about the social aspects of living. So if we want to have environments that people with different kind of needs and different kind of life situations can live together so that we don't have a segmentation, then it's also very important to address the question.
How to break the power of that? I understand that we need to work not in so silos, but currently the situation is that the builder does and then the buyer takes what they decide. So how do we change that in Finland especially?
I think that's magic.
I think this is more a question of the market mechanism. It's only to a very little extent question about regulation, because the lawmaker cannot interfere too much with markets. But that being said, there is an upcoming regulation which will be addressing, for instance, the technical service life of buildings, that we should build buildings that are going to be there for a longer time period, and that the buildings that are designed in a manner that allows the future owners and of the company of the buildings to change parts of the buildings more easily than today. So we are making a shift from this linear, like single-use buildings, from more circular buildings. So it's not going to ease your situation, I'm afraid, but there is very promising potential on the market, and I'm sure that Tuuli has several dozens of examples of those.
Yeah, I think this is a very good example of how things at the moment go. And of course, as the market has been quite heated, that's also part of the thing. Everything has been sold during these couple of past years. But I see here a lot of opportunities also through technology and technological solutions, because like I said earlier, construction has not been a very efficient area. It has been kind of done by plan, but in a way that there is not much changes. But if you go to buy a car, you can decide the color, you can decide materials, you can decide many different kind of things there. And I think buying a new flat should be the same kind of process in the future. And I believe it is possible through those technological solutions, and hopefully also like wise regulation that supports that change.
I can just add before we have another question that I can see that already now happening in Denmark more and more. So at least the bigger cities, that people are demanding, and this is referring what Maria was saying, people are demanding to have say to their flats and materials and so forth. Please, you had a question.
I had two things. One thing is very social in a way. I think a lot of Nordic countries, people, they tend to want to live by themselves, and most people want to live in the big cities, which is why we build more. And then in certain places, like I believe in Copenhagen, there's a specific regulation that all new apartments has to be at least a certain size, which are made for basically families and not for people who are single. So a lot of people end up living with a lot of roommates because that's what they only can afford. But stopping to build because the environment is probably not necessarily going to happen. So I'm just wondering, how can you get the entrepreneurs, the big builders, to use some of the sustainable solutions that are already existing out there instead of using traditional concrete, for instance?
Who wants to start?
Well, as a lawmaker, I could say that legislation is of course one of the solutions here, and Nordic countries are all working with so-called climate declarations for buildings. And for instance, already in Sweden, they have a regulation in place that you have to declare the carbon footprint of your building. In Denmark, from the beginning of next year, your building mustn't exceed certain carbon footprint. So there is going to be a regulation that forces the builders to build from more climate-friendly materials. And the same regulation will be in place in Finland in the coming years. So there are going to be emission limits, and this is only logical as the Nordic countries are having rather high, or let's say very high climate ambition when you compare to, say, other European countries, for example. So it's only logical that this ambition is also taken to the construction sector. But regulation can only set the minimum level, and we shouldn't stop there, and we should of course look for more ambitious solutions from the market, and perhaps even in like ambitious funding mechanisms that really make companies go further, and maybe give possibilities for people who want to have new apartments to ask for that sort of like apartments that have very low carbon footprints, and what makes me positive is that there are already these like market mechanisms that allow you to get cheaper funding for your apartment if it's more environmentally friendly. But Tuuli, I suppose you have good examples.
Again, first of all, I think this is the core question. The materials we use in buildings will be like in huge transformation within upcoming decades. Plastic, steel, aluminium, and cement alone creates about 40% of global emissions. And in all of these, the question is like burning. Of course, the first solution kind of at the moment is timber and wood construction, which is now getting kind of speed, I think, in all Nordic countries. Also in Finland, there is couple of big programs. Big cities are doing plans in a way that you have to do timber construction, not only in like single family houses, but bigger houses as well. But in longer term, carbon neutral steel and, for example, concrete that stores carbon are those that will be coming. And from that, of course, they are quite expensive at the moment, and that's why they don't exist yet in a big scale. But I think SSAB just said that already before 2030 it will be the steel, carbon neutral steel will be on market. And then we need these market-based mechanisms to make sure that, okay, public procurements are one thing, but what we see from an example from Neste, one of the most profitable companies in Finland during past years, they actually made their money pretty much selling biofuels to California. And that was because in California there was this legislation that there needs to be biofuels as part of the fuel system. And that kind of market-based mechanisms, I think we need also for materials to make sure that those who build houses are the ones who are responsible to make sure that part of the, and all the time increasing part of the material is sustainable.
Dora, did you have what did you address?
So, what I think here is also to address the long-term part is to dare to discuss aesthetics, which is sort of, I see that in at least in Sweden hasn't been discussed at all. So if we also dare to add aesthetics to what you are mentioning here, I think we will be thinking in a long-term perspective in order to have also living environments being very flexible in order to live together in different age groups and so forth, but actually addressing the aesthetic is very important.
Thank you. Matti, you wanted to?
Yes, I think this is a highly important point. And if you think about the future, it's clear that we just can't keep on consuming the way we have been in the past. And understandably, it's difficult to let go of old habits that we have grown used to and that the previous generations have been, performing. So in that aspect, I feel that the role of arts, design and architecture will become critical because through good design, it may be understandable that we can start to long for something that is more resource efficient, that's more accountable, that's more fair, that's better for the planet, not just for humans, but for all life on the planet. And also through arts and design and culture, I think that it can these like aspects can help us in the transition, new thinking, to new mindsets, to let go of old habits, because it's not easy. It is a difficult task, what's ahead of us, but it's a necessity that we take this step, and that here is the greatness in the project called the New European Bauhaus that I so much appreciate. And the word Bauhaus here is not referring to the hardware store that we all are familiar with, but to the 100-year-old legendary design and architecture school that started in Germany, but it was closed down pretty fast. So it lived a short and flamboyant rock star life, but now it's been revived. And I feel that we really need to take culture, arts, into the toolbox of sustainable construction. We can't solve these problems just by eco-technological innovations, which are of course essential, but they're not alone sufficient.
But if we go hand in hand, I think that's where we will really move positively forward.
Yes,
on a long-term sustainable.
Yeah, and actually time flies because this is an interesting topic and we can see that there is good questions and this is something that kind of we all can relate to because we all are living in some kind of habitants and built environments, and I think also I hear this need for system change, the transformation. So if we now we have 5 minutes, so if we round up, so what are your kind of views that what should be done, like most urgently, what would be the one thing that you would like kind of, there is, I know that there is a lot of things that we need to fix, but still one thing, one driver to start the change or speed up and scale up the change, because we know that there is a lot of, like Tuuli was, there is a lot of industrial partners that doing good things. You also mentioned that, but is there something like a public sector responsibility? Is it somewhere we can go and say, oh, we need to do something more as a region and as a governmental parties?
Okay, I think that this is all about value change. We need to truly reflect what's valuable to us and say for imaginary grandchildren of ours, and build from that perspective and make decisions today so that they would have a better world, and not limiting this to humans only, but to all life on the planet that is today the only known source of life in the entire universe. So we are so accountable for the fate of that, the well-being of that in the future. So taking that perspective, reflecting that into our values, and then acting accordingly.
Thank you. Maria, do you have any?
Well, I agree with the change of values, or like look what are the most important values and how we think about these things also. When you named about the public sector, for example, I remember an example from northern Finland. I'm myself from northern Finland. There is a city called Pudasjärvi, and there is a lot of log constructions. And if I'm correct, the city, for example, have chosen that if they build new public buildings, they will firstly use log as a material if possible. So maybe that kind of possibilities, maybe also the cities and other also bigger users, for example, when we are building new buildings, if that is needed. Of course, also the discussion of trying to use the old buildings and transfer them is also really important.
Yeah. Dorte?
Yeah, I think that definitely we need to kill the silos and work on a cross-disciplinary approach, and also leaving maybe our prestige in order to include the users much more than we have done. And that definitely brings to the term that we must use the design processes in a completely different way than what we have done before. I think that's very important.
Thank you. And Tuuli?
I can,
no words.
I can then add once again the time frame we have, because it's so short. Like 10 years ago, we were able to think like, yeah, this climate change, and now we have to plan a little bit and have a look at. Now we don't have time to do like, we of course have to do the long-term plans as well, but we also have to have the climate perspective as one of the first ones in each and every decision that is made. And so public procurement, good planning, and legislation and market-based mechanisms that support the best solutions from the market to be implemented. I think that's what we need to do right now.
Thank you. And thank you for the good questions and listening and participating. I think that we will continue these discussions, and actually we will take some of these messages, collect, and the project will use them. And then we will continue same kind of discussions in Norway in a couple of weeks, and then Iceland later on the autumn. And then end of the year, I hope that we have a kind of going around and strong messages to our politicians. And now I'm looking at Anne-Mette, our colleague from the Nordic Council. So when in Helsinki in November, we have a lot of Nordic political power in place. So I think these are the forums that we need to address exactly what you just sum up, the system change. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.